All right, I'd just like to welcome in my guest at this time, Tony Overbay, who is a fellow therapist, podcaster, and has a number of courses that I'll put in the show notes that you can be a part of, including the magnetic marriage program. Tony, welcome into the show.
Oh, Ryan, I'm excited because I feel like the more I get to know you, I feel like it's odd. There's a lot of similarities. So I enjoy kind of connecting with somebody that it's weird how there's a few of us. I think we were talking off mic that just followed a similar path in a sense. I don't know if it's just maybe all male therapists with beards. I don't know what it is, but right. kind of goes to that route. End up working with a little bit of pornography stuff, heading over into the couples world, wants a little bit of a variety. I mean, and then we end up with a podcast, and here we are.
Right, podcasts, and we also we both like to run too.
So yeah, exactly. We were talking about that too.
Yeah, I guess that's our coping mechanism for things, right?
Well, can I tell you, funny, and I know we're going in, and we're off. You can get me back on any tangents here, but so I did. I started with a 5K or so, moved up to a 10K. I remember my first half marathon. And I was going to do a marathon, check it off the bucket list. Then I did a couple of those. Then I wanted to qualify for the Boston Marathon. So I chased that for a few years and then did that. And then I thought, I'll do a few more of these. So another dozen more marathons. And then I'm like, let's do one bigger. So then I did a 50K, and that led to a 50 miler, which led to a 100K and a 100 miler. And then the next thing you know, I'm doing I did these fundraisers locally where I would run 24 hours around the track to raise money for all kinds of school things. And I would do these local news segments, and they would say, why do you do this? And this is when I was going back to grad school and figuring out that I wanted to be a therapist. And I always was like, so I can eat lots of ice cream. But then I realized, because of severe childhood trauma, but I wasn't saying that on the news articles. I was saying the whole ice cream bit, but inside I was like, why am I doing this? Like, this is kind of insane,
Yeah.
So absolutely a coping mechanism. Yeah.
Right. It's always been a good de-stressor and a time to think, and a time to also just, kind of think about your own stuff and just kind of sort through it. So it's definitely a lot of Zen moments, I think, when you're out there. And just, I'll turn off my headphones a lot of times and just think, like I like to listen to music, but also times where I just turn off my headphones and just kind of see what comes to mind. So
last night I literally did that because it was a little bit breezy. I live in a warm area, Northern California, and it was breezy. And so I turned the music off. I haven't done that in a while, or I'll listen to audiobooks a lot lately. And then just felt the breeze and just heard my breath, and it was pretty nice. It was a really nice run.
Yeah. So it sounds like one thing that I'd like to just have you kind of share a little bit about yourself for my listeners that may not be familiar with you. It sounded like maybe you got into this path a little bit later then.
I did.
Okay. So want to just tell us kind of how you got to in this field, and just kind of a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So I actually spent 10 years in the computer industry. So I'll talk about the yin to the yang, but it wasn't like I was a ones and zeros programmer. I found myself, did PR for a little software company, and then worked my way up into management this was right before the .com boom or the crash really. And so there was a pretty cool spot there for a few years where I did trade shows, and I did a lot of presentations, and I went around I probably went to Japan 20 or 30 times, and went throughout Europe and hit Russia at one point, and just did a lot of trade shows and was pitching my wares. But I got to the point where I just felt like I don't care about this industry at all. And I used to joke with my wife that I felt like I was just selling, like plastic dog vomit at a novelty store, just like didn't care. It's like, look at ours, it's a little bit different. Maybe we got some carrots in it or whatever, and it's buy this for whatever reason. And I just didn't even know what I didn't know, that you could actually enjoy a job. So about 30. And I wrote a humor column in a newspaper for almost 10 years. And so that was when we started having kids, and I started writing a lot of things I thought were pretty witty about being a dad. And so I thought, I want to write a book. I want to write a dad book that would be humorous. And then I really realized in hindsight now, I think I wanted an excuse to go back to school and get my master's in counseling. So I told myself and everybody else that, I just need to get some letters behind my name, and then I'll publish this book. And I realized even just a few weeks ago that I never did anything with the book, but I got the letters behind my name. And so then I started doing part-time therapy while I was still in the computer industry. And I started working for LDS Family Services part-time, maybe 10 hours every other week. And so I did that for 4 or 5 years. And then I start realizing, I like this. And it made just the day-to-day in the computer industry just a slog.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then just slowly found my way into private practice. And so that's where I like to say that, man, didn't realize how much when you don't care about what you do. I'm a big acceptance and commitment therapy guy. I don't know if you do much with ACT.
A little bit,
But
yeah.
okay, so then ACT has this principle of if you're not really living true to your values, you're gonna find anything else to do other than that. They call it experiential avoidance. And so I realized, I mean, I could find anything to do other than the things I was supposed to do in the computer industry, because this was when you could start buying shows on iTunes. I watched full seasons of Walking Dead and Mad Men and all these things, and I mean, and go to trade shows, and I'd have to spend a few hours in a booth, and then I would just have days, in the middle of Germany, just walking around places and just thinking, I'm trying to say this is cool, right? But apparently
not really feeling it.
No, you need a sense of purpose, apparently.
Yeah. I like the value. I use the value principle a lot with my clients, just as far as like trying to identify, like I said, just kind of what really speaks to you, and not basing your goals out of what you should be doing, but what really, like feels to you. And so that's a huge thing. And when people do that, like I said, it definitely allows them to feel more connected to a goal, rather than just like, oh, I've just got to do this thing to,
because I'm supposed to.
Yeah, because I'm supposed to. Yeah.
So so that was so then meanwhile, and I think we were talking off mic, I think this is hilarious too. So I'm a guy doing therapy, and I think I would like to help people be better husbands and fathers, not knowing that guys don't come to therapy. And so then the population I was handed were, I was basically given faith crisis and pornography addiction. And I wasn't very familiar with either one of them. And then turns out that there's a lot there. And so after a few, like 2 or 3 years, I think, of just kind of doing pornography addiction, just the way of do a push-up, sing a hymn, and have you thought about knocking it off? Turning out that isn't very helpful. And so then I felt like I kind of, in my world, identified, I called them these 5 voids. And I said, okay, I really think that people are turning into these coping mechanisms when they don't feel connected in their marriage or their parenting or their faith or their health or their career. And so then I thought, okay, I'll go figure out a modality that will address each one of these. So then I found a couples modality, a little emotionally focused therapy, EFT. And then I get some Fowler stages of faith, and I do nurtured heart parenting and acceptance and commitment therapy. And then I thought I could just have everybody run marathons, would be the health part. Turns out nobody really has. But then each one of those those different other voids, then all of a sudden now I'm doing parenting, and instead of, they come in about pornography, I'm like, yeah, we'll get to that. But if you feel more connected with your parenting or in your marriage, then you feel less likely to turn to an unhealthy coping mechanism. And then I don't know about you early in your career, but if I had one couple a week, I despised it. Or if I had 2 couples a week, I thought, okay, and now it's, a decade later, I'm doing, I guess that's been 20 years now, but 15, 20 couples a week. Cause I feel like now that I have a framework, I kind of enjoy it. But so that was my path, was starting out trying to help guys, and then realizing, okay, here's a coping mecanism. And if I can address the root cause, then it can really help.
I think the one thing that, I don't know if your degree are you an MFT or are you just master's accountant?
MFT,
Okay. So then we have that similarity. So I did see a lot of couples early on. I used to actually, I've kind of gone through phases with couples, just because it's been like, I enjoyed couples, then I didn't for a while, and then I'm kind of back in this place where I enjoy them. But a lot of times though, what I found, like kind of like what you said, even like with a model or a framework, I do feel in a lot of ways, even when you get couples in the room, it feels like there's a lot of times there's not this sense where when they're in front of you, there's a lot of individual stuff going on too. And so sometimes you have to kind of look at that too and see like, hey, it doesn't feel like this thing that's in front of me is going to get better until this thing in you maybe gets better too. So I think that perspective has really helped in working with couples as well, is just recognizing that whether it's your own individual trauma or your own individual something, addiction or whatever it is that's maybe going on for you, that's going to be a blocker to connection or a blocker to us being able to implement skills, especially like communication skills. I think is, with trauma and triggers and stuff like that. Like when you get triggered, I mean, it's so hard to execute. I mean, I can sit there and you can kind of give him this game plan about what to do.
Oh,
but if you get triggered, it's like, okay, that's just, I mean,
it's out the window.
That's out the window. So
it's funny you're saying this. I made up something last night that I feel like in my past, when I was more emotionally immature, I would have claimed that there's got to be some data. So I would have told you, data shows that, but I'm telling you, last night I made this up, but I feel like we could probably find data that backs this up. I was thinking, when people say, you can't make me, or no one can make you feel a certain way, you're choosing to feel a certain way. And I was like, oh, not really. I mean, if you look at the book Body Keeps the Score and our whole visceral reaction, when somebody I'm not a fan of or has done me wrong walks in the room and my heart rate starts to elevate and I don't even know what's going on, turns out
you can make me feel that way.
Exactly. You can, right? So yeah, like you just heard it here. I mean, I jotted down some notes about that last night and I'm like, that's going to be a cool podcast. It turns out you can make me feel a certain way.
Yeah.
So I guess it's up to
you
me.
May not be you may not be intending to,
totally.
But I mean, it's definitely there. Yeah. So yeah, I like that. So okay, well, let's I wanted to talk to Tony today. I mean, obviously, because he's got a lot of knowledge and he's a great therapist. And so I've been listening to his podcast for a long time. And so I wanted to have him on to talk about actually couples. And we just kind of wanted to delve into some things that couples could do. But first of all, maybe starting off with just some of the pitfalls that you see that couples kind of experience. And then we'll get into some tips for helping them to kind of work through some of that stuff. So just tell me a little bit about some of the things, the challenges that you see couples having.
Well, and can I tell you too, and this, I want to jokingly say, you can totally edit this out if you want to, Ryan, but what because I listened to your stuff as well. And I know you've got some marriage, like, course information and stuff you're putting together. And what I love about this space is that there's no scarcity mindset. Right. I've also been another thing I've been jotting some stuff down around is, I don't know, I'm going to go big here in a little while with, I feel like, okay, Ryan gets exclusive number 2 now today, but the individualized treatment plan. And I mean that by, I've got guys in my pornography group that have also, I've got this group called The Path Back that I love and I have a weekly call. It sounds like I'm plugging that, but I'm
that's right. You're fine.
Salesman,
you're good. Right? You're good.
But it's like, the more I'm realizing that somebody can take my marriage course. And honestly, because when we talk about pitfalls, I'm going to tell you my 4 pillars of a connected conversation. And I assume that everyone, once they hear these, they know them forever. But I don't think I don't know if she'll end up listening. I don't know if my wife can name my 4 pillars of a connected conversation, even though I talk about these constantly. And so I realize we all hear the things that we want to hear, or we kind of take in a little bit of data. And I was sharing this with a business coach of mine, and I was kind of complaining one time because I go through this marriage course people spend money on, and they hear these things I'm about to share with you, these 4 pillars of a connected conversation, and they say, oh my gosh, this is going to change my life. And when I put out a 4-pillar episode on the virtual couch, then the data, the thousands more downloads, and I get all this cool stuff. And then I had someone come up to me actually at a fireside, and they said, man, we love those 3 pillars, right? And I'm like, yes, there's 4 of them. And you guys actually literally took my course, and I don't know if you're choosing to leave one of them out or whatever. And so then I'm telling my business coach this, and he said, do you like the book, The 4 Agreements? I was like, you know what, I do. I really like that. And he said, name them. And I said, I got nothing, And so I realized that, we take in this data, it kind of gives us a little bit of a dopamine bump. We think, okay, this feels good. And then, we kind of move on, right? So I like this concept of where I feel like the more information people can take in from, I feel like, reliable sources, they're going to kind of create their own customized treatment plan for whatever it is they're going through. Right. So I don't know. So I
that's why I even like mine is like a 14-day marriage challenge that I just put together. And I just kind of always, like, as a pitch, I'm like, you'll love day 6, like, just get to day 6. You'll love day 6, kind of as, again, not thinking that it's all going to sit, but just like day 6 is great. Just go, whatever, something like that. Cause it's like, you just never know what's going to stick for people or what they're going to take away. Right. So they may hear 2 of my pillars they enjoy. And then when you come on my podcast, and you're going to lay those out, and then they're going to say, I really like day 6. So between the 2 pillars and a day 6, and then maybe a how to whatever yourself book, then they're feeling like, all right, I got a little traction, so I'll take that. So, all right. So the pitfalls. So I have taken, and this is based on, so I became a
couples therapist because of emotionally focused therapy. Sue Johnson founded this amazing framework, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of based off of attachment and that sort of thing. And so then over time, I used to just say EFT, let's EFT this and EFT that. And that isn't really a verb. And so then I started narrowing these things down to, I've got what I call these 4 pillars of a connected conversation. So the pitfalls I see are, my first pillar is to assume good intentions, that nobody wakes up in the morning and thinks, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait till 5 o'clock when he gets home, and I'm going to tell him, hey, you're never there for me. That'll get him, but if somebody if you come home at 5 o'clock and your spouse is sitting there and says, hey, we need to talk, I feel like you're never there for me. My pillar 1 is assuming that good intentions, or there's a reason why somebody says the things they do. There's a reason why your spouse is withdrawing. There's a reason why your spouse is frustrated. And so the goals of my 4 pillars are to keep a conversation going and not getting out in the weeds. Because when we can push each other's buttons, and now all of a sudden we're in the tit for tat or freeze and flee or pursue and withdraw, then we're not ever going to really touch on the actual issue at hand.
Yeah.
So my first one, the pitfall or pillar, is that we don't assume good intentions. And if somebody says, I don't want to go out with you tonight, we think, well, geez, I don't want to go out with you either, and what do we do with that, right? And
I had that actually came up in one of my sessions last night. I had a couple, they were at a concert over the weekend. I don't know if people follow the temperature. It's been like 102, 103 here in Boise area. So they consider that hot, me coming from Vegas.
Oh, Vegas.
That's a mild, evening, right? It's like not, but for them it's hot. So anyway, they're at this concert. They're enjoying themselves, and I think there was like 3 bands, they said. And at the start of the 3rd band, the wife was like, they're dancing and they're holding each other and whatever. And she just kind of turned around and said, hey, could you just kind of, you're leaning into me a little bit, whatever, like just kind of, lean back a little bit. Plus, like, I'm like super hot, like, whatever type thing. Nothing, wasn't rejecting him or anything like that. But he took that with the intent of him,
she's trying to hurt me.
She's trying to push me away. Like I'm trying to be close to her, and now she's pushing me away or whatever. And it, like I said, it turned into this whole negative thing. And that's exactly what I talked about last night. It's like, what didn't allow you to assume good intent in that? Like, or why, or even just check that out. Like, what was your intent or something, or this is what I felt like you just did to me. Let me give you the opportunity to clarify that before I just take that and run with it and assume the negative intent. And now the night's ruined because you rejected me. Right. So I love that first pillar of this.
Well, and I feel like we can, I feel like we can run with that example through all 4 of my pillars too, because that one's so good. So then my second pillar is more of this mindset, and it's you can't say, I don't believe you, or that's ridiculous, even if you don't believe them or you think it's ridiculous, because as soon as and this is where I feel like if you start seeing each one of my pillars will take the conversation off the path. So, all right, so I'm going to assume good intentions. She wanted me to back off a little bit. She's feeling hot. All right, fine. Even though I feel like it was rejection, I'm going to assume good intentions. And then when she says, I'm just kind of hot or whatever, if he then jumps in and says, okay, that's ridiculous because, a minute ago you were saying the breeze felt good or whatever. Like, if we go into that, I don't believe you. What's somebody supposed to do with that? So I feel like my second one is really this mindset of you can't. And I feel like sometimes when I say that, people hear the first part where I said, okay, you can't say I don't believe you, or that's ridiculous, or I can't believe you said that, or any of those things. And then people just hear that and they go, okay. And then the next line I'm saying is, even if you feel that way, you're allowed to feel that way. But I feel like this is where sometimes down the road, people taking my course, or I'm working with them individually, and they're saying, and I know that I have to believe them. And I'm like, no, you just don't tell them. I mean, we got to keep the conversation going, which leads to my pillar 3, which is where I have a very funny side story with this one. So Stephen Covey's seek first to understand before being understood. So my pillar 3 is basically that, but I don't know. I never want to owe him royalties or whatever. So I say, ask questions before comments. So that's a nicer way, or an easier way to say that in my book.
Yeah.
But before I called that pillar 3 and reframed it, I used to say, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but I just assumed that was in the Bible somewhere. So for about a year or two, I'd say, and like the Bible says, seek first to understand before being understood. And then I realize now, because I've also got a separate podcast called Waking Up to Narcissism, and I talk about emotional immaturity, and there's this whole concept of it's called confabulation, where you start recreating these memories to kind of fit your worldview or narrative. And so I realized that the more I would say the Bible says, then I'm like, I bet Paul said it. Like, he says a lot of cool stuff. So then I got to the point where I was kind of saying, and like Paul said, and I'm like, well, who did he say? Probably said the Corinthians. I mean, I feel like a lot of stuff's there. So I feel like I had a 6-month run where I'm like, and like Paul said to the Corinthians, seeketh first to understand before being understood. And then one night I finally Google it because I'm like, I want to know the verse. I want to sound super smart. And then it's like, oh, Stephen Covey said that. And then I thought, oh, that was rough. Like I literally, I remember the exact couple where I was like, okay.
Started that whole process. And
yeah. So my pillar 3 is questions before comments. So so this is where I will say, and matter of fact, now, cue the violin music. I'll shift and I'll give you the example of all examples for this one was, I had a couple that had talked about familial responsibility, and the husband did come home and wife was on her phone and hadn't really done much during the day. And so he just said, oh, okay. So just spending your time on the phone all day, huh? I guess what we talked about doesn't matter. And she literally had a friend pass away and she was looking up pictures for a memorial. So that's right. I tell that one because it's like, if there was ever a reason to ask questions before making comments, that would be it, or to seek first to understand before being understood. So if I'm assuming good intentions and I'm not going to put out this energy or I don't believe you, or that's ridiculous. And then I say, hey, so tell me about your day. What are you up to? And then if he would have gone in with that curiosity and she's telling him, then he can step right into that empathy and say, oh my gosh, and
the foot doesn't go into the mouth and you're not like what it
so far in his mouth. It was so bad. And so that's so I feel like if we're talking pitfalls, I feel like you can lay out all 3 of those. And then my 4th pillar, and sometimes I jokingly say that if we're going to go gender stereotype, I will often say that maybe a lot of the women that I have in couples don't normally assume good intentions, or they are quick to tell the guy that's ridiculous. Because a lot of times, if a wife says, why didn't you do that? And a guy's answer is, I forgot. I feel like that's often the answer. But if she's like, I don't believe it because you remembered this, when in reality it's, guys are that way.
Right.
But then I often say that the guy's worst enemy is my pillar 4, which is it's staying present. It's leaning in, and it's not going into like a victim mindset or victim mentality. And so I've had a number of people say, okay, I'm going to do this whole 4-pillar thing. And this is where the first example I gave, where I had a husband come home and his wife just says, you are not here for me. And literally the guy had been, in essence, not literally, figuratively, he'd been going to, I am going to be there for you, boot camp, because he had been listening. And so he was coming home and grabbing a kid and going in the backyard and playing with the dog and the kid or whatever. And then she's saying, I don't feel like you're here for me. And so then, so if he's all right, I'm going to assume good intentions, she's not trying to hurt me. I can't say that's ridiculous, even though I absolutely think it is, because I'm literally taking a kid and going and playing in the backyard. And so then he goes into questions before comments and says, okay, tell me more. Help me see my blind spots. Take me on your train of thought. And then she just says, well, you don't even greet me with a kiss. You don't even ask how my day was, or, and that was fair because he just thought he was doing the right thing. But then where he violated my pillar 4 was he said, okay, I guess all of my efforts don't matter. I'm just a walking paycheck. So when we go into that victim mode, now we want our spouse to rescue us and say, no, you're fine. Exactly. Right. Yeah. And so anyway, so I feel like those are, when you had sent that note and talking about pitfalls, I feel like my 4 pillars kind of fall into that. So if we're assuming bad intentions, or if we're putting out the vibe of that's ridiculous or you're wrong, or if we're saying, okay, well, let me just tell you where I'm coming from, and then I'm going to ask questions, or if we do listen, but then say, okay, I guess my opinion doesn't matter. I feel like you can see where any of those are just going to take a conversation just weed. And I don't know about you too, Ryan, but I feel like a lot of times couples come in and if I say, how's the week been? They'll say, it's pretty good. And then I'll say, does good just mean absence of bad? Or does it mean that you guys have been connecting and having these meaningful conversations? And I feel like usually it's the absence. Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like, I guess we haven't really thought this week, And I want more for that for my couples.
So I have a question then about the 4 pillars in terms of like the application and stuff too. Like, do you feel like that the challenge for couples is just like this tendency to kind of be more self-protective, like that what makes those as difficult to kind of apply? Like I think about self-protection a lot, and just I know we probably use this word a ton in therapy now, just vulnerability. Like it's harder to be vulnerable and keep yourself open to something rather than just kind of like let that self-protection kind of take over and like, okay, I'm not going to assume a good intent because I have to protect myself, or I'm not going to ask
Yeah.
questions because it's easier to assume what I think is happening so I can be prepared. It's like, it feels like
Yeah.
every counter there is like protect, right?
No, so that's so good too, because I feel like that it's funny that you say that, because there's a couple things that are going on. One is I tell the couple that the goal is going to feel odd for a while because it's not to resolve, it's only to be heard. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, is we're so used to protecting and defending that then we don't usually resolving is one person just saying, okay, fine, do it your way or whatever. And so then, you're right. So when I'm doing the 4 pillars, a lot of times I almost forget, because I've been doing this for a long time now, of saying, oh, the goal is to be heard. So you're going to end up with a lot of kind of, did we do it right? I mean, we didn't, what do I do like that? Okay, I heard them and I didn't tell them they're an idiot. I might've thought that, and I stayed present, but I want to protect myself because it just feels raw. And that's what I'm saying. Okay, we're changing a whole dynamic. And I often say that because couples don't know what they don't know, they're so used to violating one of those pillars and then shutting down
Just
for a
going
few
off the
hours.
derail. Yeah.
And then showing up the next day and like, is it okay? Are you good? Are we good? And then they're like, no. So we're making progress. And I feel like you're not. And so I always say that if when we change the goal to be heard, it is going to feel a little bit invalidating at times. And then I feel like the thing that happens though is there becomes this, all of a sudden there becomes this like aha moment where, oh, we now walk away from conversations and I'm not saying, I can't believe he said that, or next time I'm going to say this. And so then we start to think a little more, because we're not coming from as defensive of a place of maybe what they did say. And now I may be able to approach that conversation again and say, okay, I appreciate you sharing that, can you tell me more? But I feel like but you're so right though, because it's really reversing that dynamic of like, I always say that we go into our bunkers and we just fire shots and just, look up and see if we're okay. And, and then we feel like, okay, no, that went well. I got some shots out there. They heard me. I heard them. They're wrong, of course. Maybe they'll figure that out later, and it's just the wrong dynamic. Yeah. So, and then I think that leads to, so over on this narcissism one that I do, that one's kind of gone nuts, that part, because I think narcissism is so just out there in the zeitgeist or whatever.
Yeah.
And so then about a dozen episodes in, I made a real intentional move to talk about, narcissistic personality disorders, maybe 2% of the population. But I said, if you reframe it to emotional immaturity, then we're all pretty much emotionally immature until we're not. And so then I feel like my 4 pillars kind of expose the emotional immaturity and then give us a chance to address that. But man, I'll tell you too, Ryan, the thing that I feel like the weird part that it uncovered though is I've had a handful of, I feel like for most of the time it's going to expose that either we just didn't know what we didn't know. We weren't modeled the way to communicate. And this is so refreshing and it's awkward and bumpy, but then all of a sudden people are communicating more effectively. And now they feel like, okay, we're heading on a good path. It will also expose I don't know if my spouse is honestly maybe capable of communicating because they're so emotionally immature because of the way they grew up or the way that they saw a relationship model.
Yeah.
And then every now and again, it's like the couple will show up and they'll be vulnerable and they will start to grow into this emotional maturity and realize, man, I don't even know who this person really is. And now or I didn't even know who I was because I'm so used to defending myself or trying to break down somebody else's reality to make me feel like I'm right. And it's just fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing when you see individuals and they have a lot of those walls up and they start to allow them to come down and see themselves in a different way for the first time. It's like, it really is. It's an interesting dynamic how they don't even necessarily know themselves because they've kept either those feelings or that sense of whatever, just kind of tucked away. And as that starts to come out, it's like, oh, I like myself, or I whatever,
Totally.
So it's like or that part about myself I forgot about, or, it's like, oh, there's that fun 14-year-old girl, or there's that part of me that maybe I've just kind of pushed away, or, or whatever it is. And it's like, so it's really interesting to see that come out. And if we, like I said, if you can do that in a relationship where you can give yourself that space to, grow in that emotional maturity, it's the connection is amazing. But like said though, it's getting to that, like, I think the whole notion of couples wanting to see something at the end of something, right? Like I said, as opposed
Yes.
to just being heard, it's like,
Yeah.
but I want
No,
to be heard and I want to be right, or I want to,
oh,
or
okay. You're
something or
so
whatever,
right.
right?
So
Or
that's funny, right? Because so I've been saying a lot lately of, do you want love or control in an adult relationship? Like you can't have
Mhm.
both. And I've been, and now I feel like I'm telling you, I'm a world's worst salesman as I plug yet another thing. But I've been talking. I'm going to come out soon with I'm calling it's my magnetic marriage, the podcast, and so I'm doing some couples coaching, and
Mhm.
I've recorded maybe 5 or 6 of them, and it's pretty interesting. So the couples are showing up and they're anonymous, and that has been the theme over and over again of the couples are showing up and they're kind of acting like we're pretty good, and most of them have listened to a bunch of my stuff and they speak somewhat fluent 4 pillars and all that, but they still are doing it like weaponizing the tool,
Mm.
so they're
Yeah.
like, no, I want to hear him, but I mean, but that's like, he seriously believes that, That's like
Right.
and so I've been finding myself, really saying, okay, so you want this emotional connection as long as it's like fits your narrative,
Yeah.
and that has been really, really interesting to see. And so the
Yeah.
person that is coming onto the podcast, I think a lot to be coached, is usually the one that feels like they're kind of right, and maybe Tony can help steer the ship. And I
Yeah.
feel like it's
Yeah.
almost been 0 for 6 of where it's been the other person that's kind of said, oh no, I really don't know if it's worth it for me to express my opinion, even though my partner says, no, I really want to know
Mhm.
what you think, as long as it's not dumb,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're right.
Well, and I think the other part is too is like, even if it's not about being right, it kind of, because I been working with, again, a variety of different couples, and I think one that stands out too recently is just like, there be that sense of like, I'll give you a little bit of validation, but then I quickly, and this is a hard thing for people to do too, it's like, I'll give you some validation and then I'll quickly kind of jump over to a little bit more justification. And then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden it's just like,
Oh,
okay, so what did you really do there? Right. Because it's
yeah.
like, I'll do the tool, right? I'll validate you, but then I've got to make myself feel better in some way too, by justifying the reasoning behind whatever it is, as opposed to, again, I think that's the trouble with us, I think, as humans, just that sense of being able to be still and just stay with something, right? Again, not
Yeah.
having an end result or not having whatever, but just like, okay, there's the validation. Now just leave it there and everything could be good. But I feel like I gotta now, whether it's, again, protect myself, defend myself, whatever, this is why it was. And then it just like, well, that just went to nothing now.
Well, so it's funny when you say that. I thought of when I was really starting to understand more about like differentiation, or where one person ends and the other begins, and I was kind of thinking about, the more I do this thing with my hands where it's like, okay, we become codependent and enmeshed, kind of just because we're emotionally mature and we have all of our attachment stuff we bring into our relationships, and we want to make sure we do the right thing so the person will love us, so they won't go anywhere, because if they really figure out who we are, they might run away. I feel like
Mhm.
that's the part most of us come into a relationship with. And then I feel like then the more we start to go through stuff in life and start to realize, oh, I do have a different opinion, and then I
Mhm.
try to express it, but if my spouse says, really, like, you think that, then we're like, well, nah, I mean, maybe not, maybe I really don't. And so we keep jumping back into that enmeshment or that codependency. So then we become differentiated, where one person ends, the other begins. I say right in the middle is a ton of invalidation for a while. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's so what you're saying. I think about, I gave this example when I was speaking recently of a couple of Christmases ago. TNT was running Dumb and Dumber marathons for days, and I think that movie's hilarious. And I used to would have not admitted that, first of all, because I didn't want people to think that well, I must be dumb. And
Mhm.
I'm at home with a couple 4 kids. The youngest is 18. We're all hanging out, and then we were doing stuff, and somebody said, "What do you want to watch?" And I said, oh man, Dumb and Dumber marathon. Like, we can catch it and just keep it in the background. And one of my daughters said, do you like that movie? And I found myself in that very moment wanting to say, I mean, no, not really. And then I needed to swing the pendulum and say, yeah, it's the greatest movie ever made. Like, I snubbed at the Oscars. Like, how dare you? And I thought, oh, I can be, and I talk about calm and confident energy, and to say, oh, I do, period. And so I did that. And then, man, maybe this is the bad part about being married to a therapist. I almost like called the timeout and said, okay, everybody, how you feeling right now? Like, what? And my wife said, well, you feel like a little aggressive. And I said,
Mhm.
but I don't think I am. I think it's the fact that I didn't then acquiesce or kind of go into this, well, you guys are probably right. But I just said, oh, I like it. And I felt like it did feel like I was being a big jerk. And so I do feel like it's hard to not feel like you have to justify things when sometimes, oh, this is just is.
Just
right?
yeah, just is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Side note, don't take in high school, don't take your girlfriend's family. Don't suggest that that's a movie that we should all go see. That didn't go so well.
Okay, I can only imagine.
Although I love the movie, but it was
so I get when they come through the mountains and then they stand up together and they are stuck. I can't imagine seeing that with a girlfriend's family. So that is okay.
That part was bad. But I mean, I had seen it before and I laughed. I thought, oh, that's a great movie. I didn't really think about all the whatever at the time. And anyway, but yeah, that's a different story.
Okay, you know what? This would be fun
Yeah.
for another day sometime. But boy, so here I am saying this is fun. I'm about to say a negative thing and then get back to a funny thing. But I had a daughter go through a really, really serious car accident, and we've been talking a lot lately about people trying to make sense of things, or people want to say, well, here's why it happened, versus we kind of feel like, well, or it happened. And, and if we're going in like a religious context, instead of like, maybe God had a plan for her to get in this wreck, it's like it happened and God's with her kind of a thing. But so I was going to say, when I saw Dumb and Dumber, it was in Las Vegas and you were probably there, and so that's where I'm kind of saying, see, and now all of a sudden it all makes sense. So I'm kind of making, if people are saying, how on earth was he connecting that? But I was kind of making the joke in my head because recently I just spoke a couple of weeks ago on people that they will go through all kinds of mental gymnastics to try to make sense of something. But maybe it just doesn't make sense. And and just the acceptance of, or it just happened.
Yeah, or just it just was. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that was and so I did see Dumb and Dumber in Vegas, so for the record.
Oh, okay. Well, I actually a little bit, I grew up in Canada, so I wasn't probably in Vegas and at that time. It was that's right. Yeah. But
it's fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But still, it's we both had our moments with Dumb and Dumber. So
we did.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, is there anything else about either yourself or couples in general? I mean, as far as anything that you'd like to kind of just finish up with, as far as
so well, it's interesting because that when I was kind of mentioning the differentiation piece there, it's what I love about this business or industry, and I know I had alluded earlier to when I was in the computer software industry. And going back to that, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I really didn't enjoy it. And so I was trying to find anything to do other than anything computer related. And now that I found this thing that I enjoy, I mean, I want to listen to every podcast. I want to read every book, and I'm trying to, see how people show up in certain situations and what's mature and what's immature. And so one of the things I do think is interesting, and also another thing, the 4 pillars I feel like can pull out, is I've been talking a lot lately about the concept of healthy ego. And that's where I feel like a lot of times, when people do start to have this awareness of kind of some emotional maturity, that they start to recognize, okay, I do know the things that I know. And so I can confidently speak to those things because that can come from a place of a healthy ego. And then the opposite of healthy ego is this concept of pathological defensive narcissism, in a sense where it's like, oh, I'm so insecure that I have to pretend that I know something about everything. And I feel like, when I was in the computer industry and I had somebody ask me a question, I would assume that I could probably make sense of something that I really didn't know. And I didn't realize at that time, and here's where I feel like this is the point that I hope will come across. I didn't realize at the time that if I didn't know something, but I was trying to pretend that I did, what that sounded like to people that actually do know something about the computer industry. And so I've been I don't know, this is one of those concepts I've been thinking about a lot lately. So now I feel very comfortable saying, oh, I can speak confidently about a personality disorder, or about emotional immaturity, or about differentiation, or about not being able to stay present and going into my defensive nature to protect my fragile ego. But I also used to feel like I had to speak intelligently about my bookkeeping, or I'm sure I could figure out how to do my website, and I felt like when I was able to really understand, there are going to be things that I'm going to know, and I'm going to understand, I'm going to be better at, which then the natural opposite of that would be, so there are going to be things I don't care about and I don't know about, and then it's the more emotional maturity is for me to say, oh yeah, I have no idea. or I
Mhm.
don't know. And I feel like I
Yeah.
used to have a real hard time admitting that I have no clue about something. Or,
Right.
I don't know. Do you know where I'm
Yeah.
going with that? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that, I mean, well, two things. One is I definitely hear you on that. I think even as a therapist, it was like, especially early on in my practice, it would be like, people would maybe come in and like, oh, have you heard about this or done
Yes.
this? And they'd be like, and it'd be really easy to be like, yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that,
Absolutely,
even though
Ryan.
I'm like, I don't know.
Yes,
I mean,
totally.
but then I was comparing it to like when you asked me about ACT, and it's like, no, I have read A Liberated Mind and I've done some,
Yeah.
whatever. So it's like,
Yeah.
so I have a sense of like, I feel like it's not what I use all the time, but I know about it. So it's not like it's a more mature response, right? It's like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna, put that in this place of like, oh yeah, that's the greatest thing. And I use it all the time, but I know about it. I've read that book. I understand it, the concepts, I use the concepts, at
Yeah.
different times. And so it's definitely, like I said, it's more of a mature response. But I think in relationship to what we've been talking about as couples, thinking about it from that perspective of like what we do and what we don't do in that regards, as far as our responses there too, right? Like, how does
Hmm.
that apply in our relationships, where maybe sometimes, again, vulnerability, it's like maybe we have to just sit there and be like, hey, you know what, I really don't know how to help you right now.
Absolutely.
Tell me how I can help you, or something of that nature. Because if we just start maybe acting, or hey, I'm going to do what I think is best or whatever, and we really don't know, then we end up a lot of times maybe doing something that's more negative, because we're just acting on what we feel is the right thing. But just taking that time, and that kind of goes back to seeking the understanding, right? Where it's
Hmm.
like, hey, let me be vulnerable. Let me recognize that maybe even if we've been married 20 years, I don't know what I need to do in this moment. So let me try to figure that out by asking questions, right?
So, and I love where you went with that, because I've had that so much the same thing where, oh, have you read this book or this book early on, where I would say things like, oh yeah, and now it's like, oh no, I haven't, but
Hmm.
I'm aware of it, or I don't know, but I like what you said, because I've noticed my wife and I having even conversations about my son who's going into college right now, and he's my youngest, so it's not, we've been through this 3 other times, but I know that there have been things where she says, well, man, I kind of think this is maybe what something's going to be like with registration or when he gets on campus. And I find myself wanting to say, oh, I don't know. I think that it'll be this. And then I stop myself and I say, oh, I have zero idea. Now I'm gonna hypothesize something. And I've noticed that, she'll do the same thing at times now too, which I so appreciate. Where she's like, yeah, actually I have no idea, and I'll
Right.
say I can Google it. And versus in the past, I felt like, well, I have to say something smart, because that will make me feel good.
Right.
And so
Right.
I feel like, yeah, emotional maturity is being able maybe to start with, I don't know, or what do you think? Or I don't know, let's look it up together.
Yeah, that's
Or
right. Yeah. Yeah.
right. No, I
Yeah.
like that. I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. Those are some great things. I think, yeah, there's lots of stuff for me to digest, and hopefully everybody that's listening.
No,
So
and I can't wait to get you on my podcast and figure out
yeah.
what day 6 is, right?
Yeah.
Of this. I can't wait, Ryan.
Well, I'll say this, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. I'm
Okay.
usually saying that to guys, like day 6, it's
Oh,
a selling point to men, because again, we know men and therapy
yeah.
and getting them engaged, it can be a little bit challenged. So it's like,
Oh,
that's my
absolutely.
pitch to men. You'll love day 6. Day 6 will be for you. So if that's any indicator of what day 6 might involve, then that will be the hint for them. So
I can't
yeah.
wait. I can't wait to
Yeah.
have you on my show. All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's good to have you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Ryan.
And we'll talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.